I've always considered myself someone who works hard, stays loyal, and keeps his head down when things get tough. For over a decade, I dedicated myself to my family's business, blood, sweat, and way too many sleepless nights. I gave up other opportunities because I believed in what we were building together. I thought my commitment would eventually be recognized, that one day I'd be the one sitting at the head of the table, leading the company into the future. Turns out, I was dead wrong. It all unraveled on a night that should have been about celebration. My father was turning 60, and my parents had thrown one of their classic over-the-top parties. The kind with catered food, an open bar, and guests from every corner of their lives, friends, extended family, business partners. I was there with my wife, Emily, trying to enjoy the evening even though I'd been running on fumes after closing a big client deal earlier that week. Everything was fine at first. Laughter, clinking glasses, a little bragging about the company's recent successes. I even caught my dad smiling at me across the room at one point, and for a split second, I thought, maybe tonight he'll say something. Maybe tonight he'll acknowledge the work I've put in. When the time came for the toast, everyone gathered around. My dad stood at the head of the table, a glass of whiskey in hand. He started with some lighthearted jokes, thanked everyone for coming, said how grateful he was for his life, his family, and the business he'd built from the ground up. Then he dropped the bombshell. "I've been giving this a lot of thought," he said, his voice steady and clear. "And I'm happy to announce that I'll be stepping down as CEO soon and passing the reins to someone I believe will take this company to the next level, my grandson Tyler." I froze. My glass of wine stopped halfway to my lips. Tyler? The 23-year-old kid who just graduated with a business degree a few months ago? The same Tyler who'd never spent more than a few hours in the office unless it was to pick up a check from his part-time internship? The applause erupted around me, and my stomach twisted into knots. I couldn't even fake a smile. Emily leaned closer, her voice low. "Did you know about this?" I shook my head, unable to speak. The rest of the night was a blur. People kept congratulating Tyler, patting my father on the back, talking about the bright future ahead. I stood in the corner, gripping my glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. Tyler wasn't a bad kid, but he was immature, inexperienced, and completely unprepared for the weight of running a company of that size. I managed to avoid my dad for most of the evening, but as the guests started leaving and the house quieted down, I found him alone in his study. I closed the door behind me and asked, "Why, Dad? Why Tyler?" He didn't even look surprised to see me, like he'd been expecting this confrontation. "He's young, Adam. He's fresh out of school, full of ideas. He represents the future." I stared at him, disbelief washing over me. "I've been running this company for over 10 years. I know every client, every deal, every contract. I've been the one holding everything together while Tyler was off partying at frat houses. You know this." My dad sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's not about what you've done, Adam. It's about where we're going. Tyler can bring something new to the table." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So what happens to me? Am I supposed to sit back and take orders from him? Mentor him while he stumbles through decisions he isn't ready to make? "You could help him," my dad said, his voice almost condescending. "Show him the ropes. There's still a place for you here." That was it for me. I couldn't stay. Not after this. Not after being passed over without even a conversation, without a heads up. I told him right there in that study, surrounded by framed photos of our family and plaques celebrating the company's achievements, most of which I had earned, that I was done. I wasn't going to stick around and watch Tyler run everything I'd built into the ground. The next few days were a mess. My mom called me repeatedly, asking me to reconsider, saying I was overreacting. My dad came by the house once, uninvited, trying to talk me out of resigning. But my mind was made up. Emily stood by me through all of it, reminding me that my value wasn't defined by their decisions, that I deserved better than being treated like an afterthought. I packed up my office on a Friday evening after everyone had gone home. Walking out of that building felt like walking away from a part of myself. I knew every hallway, every desk, every creaky floorboard. I'd spent years pouring everything I had into that place, and now I was leaving it all behind. But what choice did I have? How could I stay in a place where my loyalty and hard work meant nothing? where a degree and some vague promises about fresh ideas outweighed over a decade of real results. I spent the next few weeks in a haze, alternating between anger and sadness. Emily suggested I take some time to figure out what I wanted next, but all I could think about was how easily my parents had dismissed me, how Tyler had been handed something I'd spent years earning, without even having to ask for it. The phone calls from my parents started slowing down after a while, and I began to realize something. This wasn't just about the job. It was about respect, about feeling like my contributions actually mattered. And clearly, to them, they didn't. So I stopped waiting for an apology that would never come and started focusing on something else, myself. After I walked away from the company, I felt like I'd been cut loose in the middle of the ocean with no land in sight. For over a decade, my days had been defined by early mornings, endless meetings, and the constant pressure of keeping everything running smoothly. Without that structure, I didn't know what to do with myself. I'd wake up at 6 out of habit, sit at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and stare at my phone, half expecting an email or a crisis that needed fixing. But there was nothing, just silence. Emily noticed. She's always been good at reading me, even when I try to hide behind some forced optimism. "You need something to focus on," she said one morning as I shuffled around in my slippers. "You can't keep replaying that night in your head." She was right, of course. I needed something, anything, to pull me out of this fog. But every time I tried to think about what came next, all I could picture was Tyler sitting in my office, making decisions he wasn't qualified to make, while my father stood behind him, nodding approvingly. It didn't take long for the cracks in their perfect little plan to start showing. At first, it was small things. A buddy of mine, Greg, who still worked at the company, sent me a text. Tyler just let go of 3 senior managers. Said they weren't aligned with his vision. I almost dropped my phone laughing. Those managers had been there since the early days. They knew the business inside and out. Tyler might have thought he was making bold moves, but in reality, he was sawing off the branch he was standing on. Then came the contract changes. Tyler decided to modernize the terms of some long-standing client agreements, contracts I had personally negotiated and refined over the years, relationships I had nurtured through late-night calls and weekend meetings. Those changes backfired spectacularly. Clients started walking away, some quietly, others with very loud complaints. Greg kept me updated with little snippets here and there. "Morale's in the toilet, man. People are jumping ship left and right." Another time, Tyler just gave this ridiculous speech about innovation and disruption. Half the room looked like they were about to fall asleep. Hearing about all this was like watching a car crash in slow motion. I wasn't surprised. I'd known Tyler wasn't ready for this. Hell, I told my father that outright. But knowing I was right didn't make it any easier to watch. This company wasn't just a job to me. It was a massive part of my life. Every lost client, every bad decision felt personal, even though I wasn't there anymore. The final straw, at least for me, was the financial mess Tyler walked into. I don't know if he was trying to impress a client, or if he genuinely believed he could game the numbers, but it didn't matter. Somewhere along the way, Tyler started inflating revenue figures and reports. Maybe he thought he'd fix it later, or maybe he was just stupid enough to think no one would notice. Either way, they noticed. Auditors got involved. Lawyers started circling like vultures. When Greg called me one night, I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. "Adam, it's bad. Real bad. The board is furious, and clients are pulling out faster than they can send termination notices. I don't think the company's going to survive this." I hung up the phone and stared at the wall for a long time. Part of me felt vindicated. I'd been warning my father about Tyler for years, and now everything was falling apart exactly the way I said it would. But there was no satisfaction in being right. All I felt was a hollow, sinking feeling in my chest. Emily found me later, sitting on the edge of our bed with my head in my hands. "You can't save them, Adam," she said softly. "You warned them. You did everything you could." She was right. Again. But knowing that didn't stop me from caring. Over the next few months, the updates kept rolling in. Tyler had all but disappeared from the office. Some days, he didn't show up at all. Other days, he'd wander around aimlessly, barking orders and making nonsensical decisions. Employees were quitting in droves, and clients, especially the high-value ones, were severing ties left and right. My mother called me a few times during this period. At first, she tried to pretend everything was fine. She'd say things like, "Tyler just needs time to settle in," or, "Your father is helping him through this." But eventually, the cracks in her voice started to show. She left me a voicemail one afternoon, and I could tell she'd been crying. "Adam, things aren't good here. Your father won't admit it, but I know he's scared. Please, just call me back." I didn't. Every instinct in me wanted to step in, to fix it, to grab the wheel and steer the company back on course. But I couldn't do it. Not after everything. They had made their choice, and now they had to live with it. Instead, I started focusing on myself. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to think about what I wanted. Not what my father wanted, not what was best for the family, but what would make me feel fulfilled. I'd spent over a decade proving my worth to people who would never truly see it. Now it was time to build something of my own. I started reaching out to some old clients. Just casual conversations at first. Coffee meetings, quick phone calls. I wanted to gauge the landscape, see if there was room for me to start fresh in the same industry. To my surprise, the response was overwhelmingly positive. "Adam, we've been wondering when you'd come back into the game," one of them told me over lunch. "You were always the guy holding things together over there. We'd follow you anywhere." That conversation lit a spark in me. For so long, I'd been defined by my role in my father's company, but I realized I still had the knowledge, the relationships, and the skills to do this on my own. I didn't need their approval anymore. I started sketching out ideas. Nothing fancy at first, just scribbles in a notebook, rough drafts of a business plan. Emily caught me working late one night and smiled. "That look on your face? I haven't seen that in months." There was still a long road ahead, and I knew it wouldn't be easy. But for the first time since walking away from my father's company, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Starting my own business wasn't some grand epiphany or cinematic moment of clarity. It was born out of sheer frustration, mixed with a stubborn refusal to let everything I'd worked for go to waste. I wasn't driven by revenge or some need to prove my family wrong. I just wanted to create something that was mine, something no one could take away with a speech at a birthday party. At first, it was just me at the dining room table with a laptop, a legal pad, and way too much coffee. I didn't have a fancy office, an assistant, or even a proper plan. All I had were the contacts I'd built over the years, a reputation I'd worked hard to earn, and a desperate need to feel in control of my life again. The first thing I did was reach out to a few of the clients I'd worked closely with during my time at my father's company. These were people I'd spent years building trust with. Late-night phone calls, weekend meetings, bending over backward to keep them happy. They were more than just clients. They were relationships. The conversations were cautious at first. I wasn't trying to poach anyone, and I made that clear. I just wanted them to know I was starting something new, and if they ever needed someone they could rely on, I was available. To my surprise, the response was overwhelmingly positive. "Adam, we've missed working with you," one client told me over a Zoom call. "Things haven't been the same since you left." Another sent me an email later that week. "I don't know what's going on over there anymore. It feels chaotic. Keep me updated on what you're building. I'd love to hear more." That little trickle of interest was all I needed to get moving. I filed the paperwork to officially start my own company, rented a small office space in a shared co-working building, and started pulling together the pieces. It felt ridiculous at first, going from managing a large team and overseeing multimillion-dollar deals to sitting alone in a tiny glass-walled room, surrounded by 20-somethings running tech startups. But there was also a certain freedom in it. Every decision was mine. Every success and every failure would be mine too. Next, I started reaching out to some of my old colleagues. People I trusted, people who I knew were good at their jobs and deserved better than whatever mess Tyler had turned the company into. Some were hesitant at first, worried about burning bridges or getting caught in family drama. But others didn't even need convincing. "Adam, I'm in," one of them said during a phone call. "This place is a sinking ship. I'd rather take a chance with you than stick around and wait for it to go under." Within a month, I had a small but solid team, a handful of people who believed in me and were willing to start from scratch alongside me. It wasn't glamorous. We were crammed into that little co-working office, juggling everything from client calls to setting up our invoicing system. But it felt good. It felt real. Meanwhile, news about my father's company kept finding its way to me, whether I wanted to hear it or not. Greg was still feeding me occasional updates, and every time he did, I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. "Tyler's barely showing up to work anymore," Greg said one afternoon. Last week, he called a meeting, rambled for half an hour about visionary strategies, and then left halfway through. Another time, we lost the Hanover account. Do you know how long it took to land them? Years, Adam. Years of work down the drain. Each story felt like a punch to the gut. It wasn't about Tyler failing. It was about watching something I'd spent years building fall apart because of arrogance and short-sightedness. The financial fraud scandal was the breaking point. From what I pieced together, Tyler had been cooking the books to make the quarterly reports look better than they actually were. Maybe he was trying to impress the board, or maybe he was just in over his head and panicking. Either way, it backfired. Auditors got involved, clients got spooked, and the lawsuits started piling up. My father and Tyler went into full damage control mode, but it was too little, too late. Longtime clients were pulling out, employees were fleeing, and the company's reputation was in tatters. My mother called me again around this time. Her voice was shaky, and I could tell she'd been crying. "Adam, your father he's not himself. He doesn't know how to fix this. Please, if there's anything you can do." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream. "I told you this would happen." Another part of me wanted to fix it, to march back into that office and put out every fire Tyler had started. But I couldn't. That bridge had been burned the moment my father handed Tyler the keys to the kingdom. Instead, I focused on my company. Slowly but surely, we started landing clients. Nothing huge at first, but steady, reliable contracts that kept the lights on and the paychecks flowing. Word started spreading. Clients talked to other clients. Former employees talked to their friends. And before I knew it, we were growing faster than I'd anticipated. One day, I got an email from a client I'd worked with for years back at my father's company. "Adam, I'd love to move our account over to you. I trust you. I don't trust what's happening over there anymore." It felt surreal. These were accounts that had been cornerstones of my father's business, and now they were voluntarily coming to me. I hadn't poached them. I hadn't undercut them on pricing. They were choosing me because they trusted me. Around this time, Emily convinced me to take a step back and celebrate how far we'd come. "You've been so focused on what's next, you haven't stopped to look at what you've already built," she said. She was right. In just a few months, we'd gone from a handful of people in a tiny office to a team that was landing real clients, making real deals, and earning real respect. But even with all the growth, the shadow of my family's company still loomed large. I kept hearing whispers of how bad things had gotten. Lawsuits, unpaid vendors, clients threatening legal action. Tyler, apparently, had checked out entirely. Rumor had it he'd been spotted at bars during business hours, looking defeated and wasted. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel some satisfaction in seeing it all play out exactly as I'd predicted. But mostly, I felt exhausted by it. I wanted to move on, to put it all behind me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't going to happen. Not yet. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Building my own company felt like trying to assemble a plane while it was already in the air. Every day brought new challenges, some exciting, others absolutely exhausting. But through it all, there was this underlying sense of purpose, like I was finally doing something that mattered for me. I wasn't chasing someone else's dream or trying to meet someone else's expectations. This was mine, and no one could take it away from me. We outgrew the tiny co-working space faster than I'd expected. By the end of the third month, it was clear we needed a real office. I found a modest space downtown, nothing fancy, but it was ours. Walking through those empty rooms, I felt a flicker of pride. Emily came by to check it out one evening, bringing dinner with her. We sat on the floor of what would eventually become the conference room, eating sandwiches and talking about the future. "You seem lighter these days," she said between bites. I don't know, like you can breathe again." She wasn't wrong. Even with all the stress, the uncertainty, and the sleepless nights, I felt more alive than I had in years. But a shadow still lingered in the background, my father's company. The updates hadn't stopped. Greg still sent me the occasional text, and I still overheard bits and pieces through mutual acquaintances. The company was in freefall. Clients were leaving faster than they could be replaced. Employees were abandoning ship, and Tyler had become a ghost. Apparently, he'd stopped showing up to the office entirely. No calls, no emails, just radio silence. My father had stepped back into the day-to-day operations, but it was clear he was overwhelmed. He was trying to plug holes in a sinking ship with duct tape and good intentions, and it wasn't working. The tipping point came when one of our former biggest clients reached out to me directly. They'd been with my father's company for over 20 years, a cornerstone account, one that represented stability and prestige. "Adam," the client said over the phone, his voice heavy with frustration, "we're done. I can't keep watching this circus act. If you're open to it, we'd like to move our business to you." It wasn't an easy decision. Taking them on would mean fully stepping out of the shadow of my father's company, drawing a clear line in the sand. But at that point, I realized something important. That line had already been drawn the moment my father chose Tyler over me. "Let's do it," I said. The transition was smooth, and for the first time, I felt a sense of finality. I wasn't the villain here. I hadn't stolen clients or sabotaged anyone. They'd come to me because they trusted me, because I'd earned that trust. But my family didn't see it that way. The email from my father came first. It was short, clipped, and dripping with barely concealed anger. "Adam, I hope you understand the damage you're causing. You're tearing this family apart. Whatever you're trying to prove, it's not worth destroying everything we've built. Call me." I didn't respond. Then came the phone calls from my mother. She wasn't angry. She was sad, desperate. Her voice cracked every time she left a voicemail, asking me to just talk to them. "Adam, please. Your father isn't doing well. He's stressed. He's exhausted. Can't we just sit down and figure this out?" I'd listen to those voicemails, let them sit in my inbox for days, and then delete them. Because the truth was, there was nothing left to figure out. They'd made their choice and I'd made mine. But it didn't stop there. One afternoon, I was in the middle of a meeting when my phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line made my stomach drop: "Cease and desist." It was from a lawyer representing my father's company. They were accusing me of stealing clients, violating some imaginary family agreement, and intentionally damaging their business. The letter threatened legal action if I didn't stop immediately. I stared at the email for a long time, my pulse pounding in my ears. This wasn't just business anymore. This was war. I forwarded the email to my lawyer and told him to handle it. There was no non-compete clause in my contract, no legal restrictions. They had no case, and they knew it. This wasn't about justice, it was about intimidation. But the move backfired spectacularly. Word of the legal threat got out. Clients heard about it, employees heard about it, and instead of siding with my father, most people were disgusted. It painted a clear picture of just how desperate things had become over there. A week later, my parents showed up at my office unannounced. I was in the middle of reviewing quarterly numbers when my assistant buzzed me. "Your parents are here. They don't have an appointment." I sighed, closed my laptop, and told her to let them in. They walked in together, side by side. My father looked tired, older somehow, like the weight of the world was pressing down on his shoulders. My mother clutched her purse like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "Adam," my father started, his voice tight. "We need to talk." I gestured to the chairs across from my desk, but they hesitated before sitting down. My mother spoke first. "The company is falling apart. Tyler, he's gone. He's not coming back. Your father is trying, but it's too much." I stayed silent, letting her talk. "We made a mistake," she said, her voice breaking. "We should have given the company to you. You were the right choice, Adam. We see that now. Please, we need your help." I looked at my father, waiting for him to say something. Anything. But he just stared at the floor, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I can't help you," I said finally. My voice was steady, even though my chest felt tight. "I've built something new, something of my own. I'm not walking away from that to clean up Tyler's mess." My father flinched at my words, but he didn't argue. "We thought we were doing the right thing," he said softly. We thought Tyler would. I don't know. Bring something different to the table. But he didn't, I said. And now you want me to fix it? After everything. Silence hung heavy in the air. My mother wiped at her eyes, and my father let out a slow, defeated sigh. When they stood to leave, my mother hesitated at the door. If you ever change your mind? But I wouldn't. I knew that now. As they walked out of my office, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, relief. But most of all, I felt free. For the first time in years, I was free. After my parents left my office that day, I sat at my desk for what felt like hours, staring at the space they had just occupied. Part of me felt a deep, aching sadness. This was my family, after all. My parents weren't villains. They were just people who had made a series of terrible decisions and now had to live with the consequences. But that didn't mean I owed them anything. They'd made their bed, and now they had to lie in it. Emily noticed something was off when I got home that night. I didn't even have to say anything. She could see it in the way I set my keys on the counter and collapsed onto the couch with a sigh. She sat down next to me, her hand resting gently on my knee. Did they come to see you? She asked softly. Yeah. And? They want me to fix it. They admitted they were wrong, admitted Tyler was the wrong choice, and now they're asking me to clean up the mess. She didn't say anything for a long time, just sat there with me in the quiet. Eventually, she spoke. Are you thinking about it? I shook my head immediately. No, I can't go back. Even if I wanted to, it's too far gone now. And that was the truth. My father's company wasn't just struggling, it was collapsing. The lawsuits, the fleeing clients, the employees who had been holding things together for so long finally giving up. It wasn't something that could be fixed with one person stepping in and trying to patch the holes. The damage was too deep, too widespread. But still, it lingered in the back of my mind. Not because I wanted to save the company for them, but because I hated seeing something I had spent so much of my life building crumble into dust. It felt personal, even if I wasn't there anymore. Over the next few weeks, I buried myself in my own company. Things were moving fast, faster than I'd anticipated. The new office was buzzing with energy, and our team was growing steadily. Former clients from my father's company continued to reach out, asking if they could transfer their accounts over. Every time I signed a new contract, I felt a mix of pride and bittersweet regret. I wasn't poaching anyone. I wasn't undercutting anyone. These clients were coming to me willingly, and yet I knew my parents saw it as an attack, as some kind of betrayal. But I couldn't focus on that. I had employees who relied on me now, a team that trusted me to lead them. That was my responsibility, not fixing the wreckage my father and Tyler had left behind. One day, I got a call from Greg. His voice was low, almost hesitant, like he wasn't sure if he should even be telling me this. Adam, they're selling the building, the main office. Your dad signed the papers yesterday. The office building had been more than just a place where deals were made and contracts were signed. It was a symbol, a monument to everything the company had achieved. I'd spent countless hours in that building, working late into the night, walking those hallways, making decisions that shaped the future of the business. And now it was gone. They didn't have a choice, Greg continued. The lawsuits, the debt, they're barely keeping the lights on. Selling the building was the only way to buy themselves more time. I hung up the phone and sat in silence. I didn't know how to feel. Angry? Sad? Vindicated? None of it seemed to fit. It was like watching a house you used to live in burn to the ground while you stood across the street, unable to do anything about it. But despite everything, life went on. My company kept growing. My team kept showing up every day with enthusiasm and dedication, and Emily and I started talking about the future in ways we hadn't before. For the first time in years, we were thinking about things like vacations, buying a bigger house, maybe even starting a family. Then the email came. It was from my father. The subject line simply read, "An apology." I almost deleted it without reading, but something stopped me. I opened it and started reading, my eyes scanning each line slowly. He admitted everything. Admitted that he had let his pride get in the way, that he had been so focused on the idea of Tyler succeeding that he had ignored all the warning signs. He admitted that he'd been wrong to overlook me, Wrong to assume that a degree and youthful enthusiasm could replace years of experience and dedication. I know I can't undo the choices I made, he wrote, but I need you to know how deeply I regret them. You were always the one holding everything together, Adam. I see that now, and I'm sorry it took losing everything for me to realize it. The email went on, recounting moments from the early days of the company, late nights we'd spent working side by side, deals we'd closed together, obstacles we'd overcome. For a moment, I felt like I was reading something from a different version of my father, a version I hadn't seen in years. He ended with this: I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope that one day, you'll be able to think of me without anger in your heart. I closed the email and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Emily found me there a few minutes later, her face full of concern. What did he say? I handed her my phone, and she read it quietly. When she finished, she set it down on my desk and sighed. What are you going to do? I don't know, I said honestly. Because what could I do? An apology didn't change anything. It didn't erase the years of feeling undervalued, overlooked, and dismissed. It didn't fix the damage done to our relationship, but at the same time, it was something. It was more than I ever expected to hear from him. In the end, I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't know what to say. Instead, I kept moving forward. My company continued to grow. Our team became stronger, and I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. One afternoon, as I sat in my office reviewing quarterly reports, Emily walked in and set a cup of coffee on my desk. You look happy, she said with a smile. I think I am, I replied, and I meant it. For the first time in a long while, I truly meant it. Months passed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. The weight that had been sitting on my chest since the night of my dad's birthday toast had finally started to lift. My company was stable, our client base was growing steadily, and my team, felt like family. The work was intense, the hours were long, but every bit of it felt worth it because it was mine. Emily and I even took a weekend trip to the coast, something we hadn't done in years. Sitting on the balcony of our little rental overlooking the ocean, she leaned against me and said, You seem settled. It was such a simple word, but it hit me hard, because she was right. I felt settled, content in a way I hadn't been in over a decade. But the thing about peace is that it never lasts as long as you want it to. I was in the middle of a team meeting one Tuesday morning when my assistant poked her head into the conference room. Her expression immediately told me something was off. Adam, there's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent. I stepped out of the room and found Greg standing in the lobby. He looked exhausted, eyes sunken, shoulders slumped. Greg? I said, surprised. What are you doing here? He rubbed the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable. Adam, it's over. The company. Your dad's company. It's done. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. What do you mean, done? They filed for bankruptcy this morning. It's all gone. The lawsuits, the debts, they couldn't keep it afloat anymore. I didn't know how to respond. A strange mix of emotions flooded through me: grief, anger, guilt, relief. It felt like someone had dropped a stone into my chest, and I was sinking with it. I thought you'd want to know, Greg said quietly. I nodded, still unable to find the right words. That afternoon, my phone started buzzing with messages. Former coworkers, old clients, even distant relatives. Everyone wanted to talk about the collapse of my father's company. News articles were already circulating online, dissecting the company's downfall with brutal precision. Tyler's name was plastered across headlines, and my father was being painted as a man who had let pride cloud his judgment. I stayed late at the office that night, scrolling through article after article, reading anonymous quotes from employees who described a toxic environment and leadership failures. It was surreal seeing something that had been such a massive part of my life reduced to clickbait headlines and comment threads. When I finally made it home, Emily was waiting for me on the couch. She didn't ask how I was feeling. She just opened her arms, and I sat down beside her, letting the silence settle over us. In the days that followed, the fallout was messy. My father went radio silent. My mother left me a few tearful voicemails that I couldn't bring myself to return, And Tyler? Well, Tyler disappeared entirely. From what I heard through the grapevine, he'd moved out of state to start over. I tried not to think about it. I had my own business to focus on, my own team to support. But the past has a way of creeping back in, no matter how hard you try to leave it behind. One evening, as I was locking up the office, I noticed someone standing near the entrance. It was my father. He looked smaller somehow, like the weight of the last year had physically shrunk him. "Adam," he said softly. I stood there for a moment, the key still in the lock, before finally turning to face him. "Dad." "I didn't know where else to go," he admitted, his voice cracking slightly. We walked to a nearby cafe and sat down at a corner table. For the first few minutes, neither of us said anything. My father stared down at his cup of coffee, his hands trembling slightly as he held it. "I lost everything," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "The company, the building, the respect of the people who worked for me. It's all gone." I didn't say anything. What could I say? That I was sorry? That it wasn't his fault? Neither of those things would have been true. "I thought I was doing the right thing," he continued. "I thought Tyler would. I don't know. I thought he would rise to the occasion. But I was wrong. And now everyone's paying the price for my mistake." He looked up at me then, his eyes red-rimmed and glassy. "But the thing I regret the most, Adam, is how I treated you. You were right all along, and I didn't listen. I pushed you away when I should have been supporting you." Hearing those words didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought they would. There was no vindication, no triumphant feeling of "I told you so." There was just sadness. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he said. "I know I have no right to. I needed to say it to your face. I'm sorry, son." For a long time, I didn't speak. I just sat there, staring at the man who had once been larger than life to me. The man who had taught me how to shake hands firmly, how to look someone in the eye when making a promise, how to take pride in my work. Now he looked like a shell of that man, and it broke my heart. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet," I said finally, "but I appreciate you saying it." He nodded slowly, as if he'd been expecting that answer. We sat there for a while longer, sipping coffee and exchanging small talk about nothing in particular. When we finally stood to leave, he extended his hand. I shook it, and for a brief moment, it felt like we were back in the early days of the company, before everything had gone so horribly wrong. When I walked back to my car that night, I felt lighter. Not because everything was fixed, it wasn't, and it probably never would be, but because some small piece of the weight I'd been carrying had finally been set down. Life moved on after that. My company continued to grow. Emily and I started planning a long overdue vacation, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free from the shadow of my family's expectations. I don't know if my father and I will ever fully repair our relationship, or if Tyler will ever take responsibility for his part in all of this. But I do know one thing. I built something good out of the wreckage. Something strong, something honest, something that no one can ever take away from me again.